The Divorce Tracts by John Milton and other prose works. Hello and welcome to the discourse. John Milton began as a poet, but after the publication of Lycidas in 1637, he actively took part in civil unrest and started publishing prose works, tracts, and pamphlets in favor of Puritan and Parliamentarian cause. He enthusiastically wrote many texts and pamphlets against episcopacy. From 1640 to 1660, John Milton predominantly wrote prose works. One of his earliest prose works was of Reformation, touching church discipline in England, which was published in 1641. Of Reformation by John Milton. John Milton often raised and supported the ideas of individual liberty and the limits of social and religious institutions. Of Reformation touching church discipline in England is a pamphlet with two books in which Milton discussed how Anglican Church is gradually becoming as corrupt as the Roman Catholic churches and why the English Church requires stern reformation and changes. Milton further published 4 more pamphlets on the same line discussing the church hierarchy. In Of Reformation, Milton expresses religion as a living body and suggests that proper reformation and changes will improve the body. He further attacks the church system and says that any mediating agency between an individual soul and the Almighty would hinder this pure connection between man and God. He literally criticized the church, government, and liturgy and suggested that these institutions harm the religion. Milton suggests that the church tries to offer a shape to God, while though God does have a shape, it is beyond human perception, and thus any attempt to give a body to God will corrupt the divinity. He metaphorically compares religion with a human body with various parts. In Book 2, John Milton offers the tale of Van, in which Van tries to establish that he is supreme and most important part of the body. However, a philosopher appears and discusses the role of Van and proves that Van is just a parasite that is exploiting the other parts of the body. Milton then compares the church system with Van. In this pamphlet, Milton opposed the establishment of the central church government, as was the case of the Roman Catholic Church under Pope and Anglican Church headed by the Monarch of England. Instead of the central authoritarianism, Milton supported local government and suggested that individual congregations should govern themselves. The Divorce Tracts. From August 1643 to March 1645, John Milton published 4 pamphlets in 18 months, and all of them offered his idea of the need for freedom to divorce. He suggested that the freedom to divorce will prove to be beneficial for both sexes. These 4 tracts were The Doctrine and Discipline of Divorce, The Judgment of Martin Bucer, Tetrachordon, and Cholesterion. In all these tracts, the central idea was that divorce could be the good of both sexes. The full title of the first pamphlet was The Doctrine and Discipline of Divorce, Restored to the Good of Both Sexes from the Bondage of Canon Law, and it was published in August 1643. The Judgment of Martin Bucer was published in July 1644, in which he supported the pro-divorce arguments of German Protestant reformer Martin Bucer. In Tetrachordon, John Milton offered his viewpoint of 4 important scriptural texts about divorce. These 4 scriptural passages deal with divorce, and these are Genesis 1st, 27-28, Deuteronomy 24:1, Matthew 5:31-32 and 19:2-9, and I Corinthians 7:10-16. Tetrachordon was published in March 1645, and in the same month, Milton published the 4th tract on divorce, titled Cholesterion, which means rod of punishment in Greek. Background. In June 1642, John Milton got married to Mary Powell, a 17-year-old young girl. He was 34 years old. Mary Powell belonged to a royalist family, and she was also a royalist, while Milton was a supporter of parliamentarians. Milton believed that Mary Powell was intellectually inferior to him. Also, she was too young to him. Furthermore, while Mary Powell belonged to an affluent family and was raised with all comforts, John Milton led an austere lifestyle by nature. This created a rift between the newlywed couple, and Mary soon decided to desert John Milton alone and went back to her family home. In the Doctrine and Discipline of Divorce, John Milton not only offered the reason and logic behind his argument for freedom of divorce between an incompatible couple. At that time, the subject of divorce in England was ruled by the canon law of the Roman Catholic Church. Strictly speaking, divorce was almost forbidden and was only allowed in extreme cases of adultery. Milton couldn't blame Mary Powell for adultery, and hence his divorce to her was impossible. Milton thus raised the logic of individual volition and personal liberty. The argument of the Tracts on Divorce. In a way, Milton opposed the spiritual authority over marriage as mentioned in Matthew 19:3-9, while offering his idea of marriage based on human nature. He opposes marriage as merely a means to procreate or reproduce, or as a remedy against fornication. Rather, he emphasizes human nature and why God created an able companion for man. He argues that the purpose of marriage is the apt and cheerful conversation of man with woman, to comfort and refresh him against the evils of solitary life. Milton says that if a couple is mistaken in their dispositions through any error, concealment, or misadventure, for them, spite of antipathy to face together and combine as they may to their unspeakable wearisomeness and despair of all social delight, violates the purpose of marriage as mutual companionship. Thus, according to Milton, if a married couple finds that they are mutually incompatible and cannot bear being with each other, they must be allowed to legally and respectfully divorce each other. Milton continued to support and express his idea of the purpose of marriage, and did so even in Paradise Lost, in which he describes how Adam felt lonely while observing other animals enjoying the fruits of companionship. Adam then begs God to offer him a companion, and God creates Eve from Adam's rib. Achievements of Doctrine of Divorce. Milton vociferously argued in support of the freedom to divorce and raised his argument in front of the Westminster Assembly. He argued that divorce is a private matter. Though his argument was not fully accepted, the Westminster Assembly agreed that in certain cases, as in the case of adultery and abandonment, divorce must be allowed. The Westminster Assembly was broadly a Puritan organization. Milton himself was a Puritan. While Puritans were supposed to follow scriptures word by word, it was a big win for Milton as the Westminster Assembly agreed to loosen the rules on divorce in special cases of adultery and abandonment. Despite that, Milton couldn't divorce Mary Powell, and in 1645, Mary Powell returned to Milton, and both of them successfully led married life. So this was all about initial prose works of John Milton. We will continue to discuss his other works in upcoming videos. Please stay connected with the discourse. Thanks and regards.